Hi, everybody. This is Marissa Pulselli here. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Power of Women Using Their Voices. I am thrilled beyond belief to have as my guest today, Doug Wendt. Doug, thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor. Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you. So Doug is a business growth strategy consultant. He is also the founder of the Cardinal Cancer Foundation. And to give you a little bit of personal background, I went to college with Doug and with his wife, Alice, and I always loved seeing their love story because not only did you guys build a life together, but you built a business together as the co-founders of Wendt Partners. And when Alice was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, you faced that as partners as well.
Yes.
So now, you're founding this organization to continue to give her voice the impact that it so deeply deserves to have. Doug, before we get into anything else, is there anything else you want our viewers to know about you?
Sure. One of my favorite hobbies is to enjoy the trains of the Northeast. So, and yes, for those of you Philadelphians, I know it's hard to believe, but I actually like SEPTA. So I'm the one person in all of the entire Northeast corridor who actually enjoys hanging out on SEPTA trains. And so I actually, many years ago, right after college, I worked in Bryn Mawr for an educational publisher that was 2 blocks from the train station. That just tickled me pink. They thought I loved working there. I really just loved taking lunch hour and checking out the trains.
I thought I was a train enthusiast, but you have taken it to a whole new level.
Because I like the trains that don't even arrive on time.
There you go.
I know.
And a whole slew of other things, but we won't get into that. But you are a purist. I mean, you are truly devoted.
All the way.
Yes. And I know that we both enjoy that trip to Pittsburgh and the Horseshoe Curve.
Yes,
so that's
very
just
much.
Epic.
It is epic. The amazing 4-track main line that connected the East and West right through the Allegheny Mountains. Absolutely.
Yes. Awesome. I do want to throw this out to our viewers as well. You can always type in a live comment into the comment section, and we can feature it on the program if you're viewing live. If you're catching a replay, please feel free to put a comment so that we can respond. Doug, before we dive into questions, and this, of course, will be a little bit of a different format than my previous shows have been because you're not a woman.
True.
It's very true. But before we dive into that, there is one other person I would like to introduce, and that is Alice. And I know that you and I talked a little bit about this before the broadcast went live. We're going to be talking a lot about bringing awareness to issues, to women's health issues, to things that are important in society. And sometimes it can be easy for this to feel theoretical or abstract or to get lost in the numbers or the big issues. And that's not what this is about.
No.
This is about a person.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's about a person who should still be here with us.
Yes.
So I, with your kind assistance in sending me a few photos, have put together a couple snapshots of Alice. It's about 30 seconds. I'm going to bring that up onto the screen right now. I want to take my title down so that we're not having any obstruction to
this beautiful video that you put together. Yes.
And we're going to make this our solo video. Sorry, Doug, did I lose you? Where are you? Okay, there you are. Oh, you're going to go back on in just a second. And that is entirely due to my inefficiencies with technology. But
not at all. I felt you were giving me a nice stretch there. I stretched and then I compressed and then I went up and down. It's all good.
You did your calisthenics
That's
again. Very
correct.
good. Um, such a touching video to watch. And before I ask you your first question, I just want to share with everybody that the closing picture, the one of Alice in that beautiful red dress, that's a picture that I saw on Facebook. And when I saw it, I had no idea that Alice was battling cancer. I saw it and I just thought, damn, she looks good. Alice is great. She's so vibrant. She's so full of life, as she always was. But I mean, I had no idea until after she passed and you shared that she had lost her hair through the treatments and she had gone to get a wig.
Yes.
And that was the photo shoot. So tell us a little bit about that.
So no matter what kind of cancer a woman faces, chances are 9 times out of 10, she's going to be going through chemotherapy intravenously. And the chemotherapy has a lot of impacts on the body, one of which is hair loss. Mm-hmm. And, for men, this is frustrating. For women, it's devastating, typically speaking. Mm-hmm. And women really have 3 choices about how they can address it. The vast majority will, assuming they go toward the wig direction, which most women do, will choose a wig that looks like the hair that they had. Mm-hmm. The second option is to just shave and go very, very, basically like my hair. And the third option is to do something completely different. Mm-hmm. The other interesting question is that a lot of women are so hesitant about this that they wait until the chemotherapy starts, because a very, very small percentage, I mean like 1% of women will not experience significant hair loss. Mm-hmm. It's possible, but it's not really what happens. The vast majority will have major hair loss. And so what happens is, we actually met a woman who had this happen. She said that clumps of hair came out in the middle of a meeting. Oh, and it just about took her completely apart.
Yeah.
So what happened was, we went to the wig store, and this wig store basically has developed a specialty in working with women facing cancer, and talked to women who were going through various stages of cancer treatment. And the unanimous feedback was to get ahead of it. Shave your hair proactively, get fitted for a wig, and start that process so that you're not sitting there waiting for the inevitable. You've taken charge over it. Right. It was Alice's idea. So Alice agreed to do that after much thought. It was her idea after trying on. I mean, I have photos of every wig she tried on. She probably tried on 35 wigs. And it was her idea to go in a completely different direction and change her hair color, which actually ended up being good for a couple of reasons. One is, when you make a minor change, but everyone sees it as a major thing and they can't quite put their fingers on it, there's always that risk when you go from your natural hair to a wig that people are going to kind of look at you like, I don't know what it is, but something's different.
Yeah.
When you make a major change, the mind doesn't work that way. It goes, oh, wow, something different. And then it embraces the new thing. So, number one, it really eliminated any concern about her having an awkward conversation with anyone she didn't want to discuss cancer with, which was very important. And number two, the change literally empowered her. She really became, like, it was kind of exciting. It's like she turned over a new leaf. Like, okay, I'm going to battle this thing, but I'm not just going to battle it. And I've struggled with that terminology, even though it certainly is a battle. I'm not saying it isn't. But the fact is, she took what could have been a devastating moment in her life, and certainly it was emotionally traumatizing. And she turned it not only into something neutral, she turned it into something empowering.
Yes.
And found a whole new side of herself in the process.
Amazing. And just, if anyone who knew Alice knew that was her MO with life, just being able to find and seize all of the goodness from any possible moment. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Not at all.
Doug. I want to dive in with a phrase that I came across in prepping for this interview with you. I know that you learned a lot about yourself and about the experience of women through taking this journey with Alice. And one phrase that you've used to describe yourself is as a recovering misogynist.
Yes.
And that, first of all, it really threw me when I saw it, because I've known you for like 2 decades now. I've always considered you to be a really progressive guy. I mean, your wife was your best friend and your business partner. So, it it threw me, and it also really made me think that, misogyny isn't just the Neanderthal ready to club someone over the head and drag them
Right.
into a cave and say, make me a steak, woman, right? It is, although you might like that too. I don't know.
The steak. I like the
Part.
steak.
Yes. But there's so much more subtlety to it. And I wonder if you could speak to us a little bit about what that phrase means to you.
Yes. So that phrase came out of a couple of realizations. The first realization was the nature of how aspects of our marriage journey and our cultural assumptions impacted the potential of this cancer to destroy our lives. Mm-hmm. So, ovarian cancer is a gynecological cancer. It's called the silent killer of women. It is very complex cancer. It's heterogeneous, which means that in layman's terms, every person's tumors are very genetically different from every other. And so basically each person has their own form of cancer, if you will, in the case of, and that's true across all disease, but in some cases there's more similarity than in others. So it's already complicated. It's hard to detect. We can get into that later because it's not impossible to detect. But I realized that in 25 years of being with Alice, 23 of them in our marriage relationship, that throughout that entire time, she had voiced pains, discomforts, concerns, frustrations that collectively should have sounded an alarm about her health. And it should have sounded one with her, obviously, and it certainly should have sounded one with me. And it didn't. And in her case, it was very explicitly because of beliefs, teachings, and cultural assumptions that she'd been taught by her family, by a very specific interpretation of her faith, and by other environmental factors and experiences. For me, it was because nobody ever told me it was essential for me as a man and as a husband to pay attention to women's health, or even what that means. I'm a recovering misogynist because I bought into, completely unconsciously, a system of thought that says it's not my responsibility or my problem. And at the end of the day, on some level, maybe not a level of intent, it's like the difference between, murder and manslaughter. Okay, I didn't intend to be a contributing factor. I was a bystander. I didn't do anything active to cause this to happen to Alice. But I also was a bystander at times when I could have taken action. Now, we all recognize as adults, it's our own responsibility. At the end of the day, the buck stops with each of us. It's not like I never took to her doctor's appointment. I didn't get in the way of her health care, but I did not take it with the level of seriousness that I now am very aware it warranted. And so in that sense, I'm a recovering misogynist. The other sense in which I mean it is that I didn't really think about the larger system of beliefs and assumptions about marriage, motherhood, and my relationship with Alice that helped contribute to my lack of attentiveness to this area of her needs, both from a health perspective and from a sexuality perspective, to be quite frank, because they're obviously completely intertwined. Gynecology is the intersection of sexuality and health, and women's healthcare. So that's why I say I'm a recovering misogynist, because if I were already recovered, I would have been able to rise above the societal framework in which I was brought up, in which we were all brought up. And yet I realized after a quarter century of most of it trying to think of myself consciously as a progressively minded individual, that right under my nose I was allowing things to unfold that I really shouldn't have.
That is, first of all, thank you for saying that. It's it's something I haven't heard anyone give voice to before. And it's not about assigning blame or trying to make anyone feel bad. It's, okay, we realize this now. Can we start making this the norm in the way that men view their relationships with women?
Absolutely.
And that's really what this is about, right? It's not about men, you messed this up. This is, okay, we've lost some really great people, and we know that we have greater opportunities to be more attentive to each other as human beings, as lovers, as partners, as friends, as family, to help each other, and especially in intimate relationships, to help each other be as healthy as possible.
Absolutely.
So it's
Yes.
vitally important. I know that you talked about some of the assumptions as being that it was the woman's responsibility to see to that area of her own health. Were there other assumptions that you have uncovered that you were operating under sort of just unknowingly that now to you seem like something that should change?
Sure. And actually, since we're on the tail end of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, it's a perfect time to make a comparison. It's hard enough in our society to talk about breasts, which is ridiculous, right? I mean, we all know what they are. They're in front of everybody all day. This is not a mystery. But it took a quarter century of enormous effort and enormous amounts of money, quite frankly, to get to the point where people can openly talk about breast cancer awareness. And probably if you interview people on the street, even men will say, oh, well, a woman needs to check her breasts and make sure that there are no lumps. And if she's older, she needs a mammogram. Even men know that. Okay, now they know that. Translate that over to gynecological cancers. And in the case of ovarian cancer, here's the thing that really is startling in comparison. It is 1/10 as frequent a cancer as breast cancer, right? There are 10 times as many breast cancer cases each year. However, ovarian cancer is 10 times as deadly. So the mortality of the two is the same. Basically, the same number of women will die this year from ovarian cancer as die from breast cancer, even though the affliction rates are completely different. And the bottom line is that's attributable in a large degree. Okay, when you wipe away all the medical terminology and that we have a test for this, we don't have a test for that, and all these kinds of things, at the end of the day, the driving difference is lack of awareness and attention to the signs and symptoms. So what are the signs and symptoms of a cancer like ovarian cancer? Discomfort during sexual activity, painful urination, bloating, awkward and inconsistent periods that are difficult to track and cycle, spotting that you don't anticipate. All the things that men are taught, if they're even aware of them at all, to ignore. And that women are taught to ignore, even though these are the things happening to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So this collective willfulness to ignore things that seem icky, okay, and that are, as I say, below the waist and therefore somehow in a mystery zone that we don't talk about, is deadly. And first of all, it's stupid. And second of all, it's lethal. And, we need a revolution in women's health discussion and awareness and openness below the waist that we've somehow finally started to achieve above the waist.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The comparison between the way the two different diseases are treated and given awareness is just so stark. And I didn't know that statistic about the mortality actually being the same between the two.
It's unbelievable. And at the end of the day, what happens is most breast cancers today are detected in stage 1 or stage 2 today. Most gynecological cancers, particularly ovarian cancer, are detected in stage 4.
Wow.
By the time you realize you have it, you're already in very, very serious trouble. And in many cases, it's already metastasized.
Wow.
Okay. So that's the driver of the difference. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. And it just seems that so much of this it can be traced back to this ingrained practice or habit that not just men have, but that women have. I mean, I've even seen it in myself, wanting to just ignore something because it's just part of being a woman. You're supposed to suffer, right?
Yes.
Things are supposed to be uncomfortable and painful, and just deal with it because, it's going to happen all the time and no one wants to hear about it. And especially a businesswoman, there's a secondary stigma. You don't want to go into a meeting and have someone accuse you of having PMS.
Right.
It undercuts
or looking weak in any way
right.
possible.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
And I'll throw a couple of other pieces into the equation here, right along the lines of what you're talking about. First of all, this is not a unique problem associated with one end of the political spectrum or the other. It's a crisis of both. On the conservative end, we have this misogynistic history of tying women's suffering back to the sin of Eve. I mean, literally, that's the cultural basis for it. Women are supposed to suffer around fertility and childbirth because of the sin of Eve. It's been rooted in our culture for 2,000 years, and we haven't really made any significant psychological progress from it. So that's the problem on the conservative side. Then you mix in the whole hesitation to talk about sexuality, right? So you've got a double whammy on the conservative side. On the liberal side, we're very good at liberating women's sexuality, but not their gynecology. So women are supposed to be comfortable being self-sexualized objects and self-actualized objects, as long as we don't have to deal with any of the difficult stuff, because God forbid we complicate things. So it astounds me that these two sides of our culture, which tend to just constantly go to battle, right? The culture wars, are unified in their complete and total ignorance and unwillingness to address women's gynecological health in a serious manner. One, because they're fearful of it, and the other because they just couldn't be bothered. You know? So that's one key issue here is whichever sort of side of the spectrum you come from, let's first acknowledge that we're coming from a position that's a total and complete failure in terms of meeting the needs of women in society, because it is, bar none. Then we can actually make progress.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I know that you mentioned earlier cultural and specific interpretation of a faith sort of influences.
Yes.
And another thing that you are not about is judging one faith or another, or one side of the political spectrum or another. It's about looking at humanity and saying, this is part of our human family whose personhood we have routinely ignored, and whose health we have routinely ignored. And we can all do better, whatever our beliefs are in any other category.
Yes, and I think another key thing here that we have to consider is that the number of women who probably need to be candidates for proactive gynecological surgery is going to go up, okay? Because the reality is we live in a synthetic society with a lot of influential factors impacting our biology, impacting our hormones. We are having families later and later. Okay. And our gynecological evolutionary biology was not designed to support infinite forward motion. We have a time period, okay, when we have optimal fertility, and leading up to that, it's just like an airplane. Okay. When an airplane, if you talk to any pilot, they say the two most dangerous parts of flight are takeoff and landing. The cruise is a breeze. For women, that is the ramp up time of fertility. Okay, and it's the time when aging begins to degrade the fertility system. And if I were to go back and look at it and think about the bigger picture here, because Alice was clearly a candidate for proactive gynecological surgery, whether that meant ovarian, removal of the ovaries, or more because there are 3 or 4 different kinds of hysterectomy depending on the gynecological indicators. It's not like a one size fits all. It's a whole range of surgical interventions. But the reality is that when that system begins to fail, in many cases, it's better off to remove it. Not all, but in many. Because those organs are decaying and they're at risk for becoming diseased, cancerous, and susceptible to other disease conditions. So I think there's going to have to be a real revolution in recognizing that women's gynecological life cycle is going to have to change.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you bring up, because I know it's still controversial even to talk about proactive removal of the breasts for women who are at increased risk for breast cancer.
Yes.
And just not even from a medical perspective, but from the standpoint of women acclimating themselves to that possible reality.
Yes.
So yes, I think revolution is the accurate term for what needs to happen on a psychological, sexual, and social level.
And we live in a society that's still, it's amazing, it still likes to define people by parts. So, somehow you're less of a woman because you're an A cup and you were a D cup or whatever cup, or you have no cup. It's ludicrous, okay? And it's dangerous. I certainly understand. By no means am I suggesting this is a cakewalk for a woman to seriously consider any of these surgeries, whether proactive or in response to a disease condition. But the reality is our society needs to embrace the fact that people are who they are, regardless of the presence or lack of presence of these particular organs. But that is so intertwined in so many cultural, minefields. And, I mean, it's just, we've got a long way to go. But I'm excited to try to at least start that process.
And you are starting that process. I had plans on asking you this later in our interview, but I think this is a perfect segue. If you can tell us a little bit more about the Cardinal Cancer Foundation, sort of what your core tenets are, what you're trying to accomplish, that would be great.
Sure. So let's sort of look at the context of everything we're talking about, and I think you'll see two consistent themes, and they're tightly intertwined. One is we need to do more for women facing these diseases, okay? In the case of ovarian cancer, number one, it usually gets detected late. Number two, when it gets detected, if your body does not fully respond and go into the permanent remission, which is typically in cancer treatment, it's 5 years or longer. After your first phase of treatment, the options go from bad to horrific. There's not even worse. It just goes from bad to horrific. So it was a 2-year journey for Alice. She had surgery, debulking surgery, okay, which is a whole complicated process. Then 6 to 9 months of chemotherapy. Then she was declared no evidence of disease. That's what they say. Within 2 months, we found out the cancer either had returned or had never really left. You don't, of course, know because it's on a molecular level.
Right.
Okay. And then we were faced with a whole host of questions. And the reality is that you're rolling the dice. So the first thing we have to do is we have to solve the problem of helping women and their caregivers, spouses, loved ones manage this journey better. Okay. And I will just, as a side note, mention very specific to gynecological cancers. Most patients who have ovarian cancer are postmenopausal. It typically, and this is all statistics, right? So statistics don't tell the human story. It typically strikes women when they're older, okay? But the reality is there are lots of women who have it middle age, some even at younger years. The system of gynecological cancer care is built around a postmenopausal mindset. Which means that when you have the debulking surgery and the hysterectomy, because it's a surgical hysterectomy, the first thing that you cannot receive is hormone therapy, because estrogen therapy can potentially feed cancer growth. So when you have a normal hysterectomy, the first thing that you do is you go on therapy to help balance out your hormonal response. The reason this is important is the change in your hormones changes your makeup as a human being. And we went through 2 battles. One was the cancer, the other was the hormones. And the second one we went through completely alone. So when I talk about providing better options for women facing gynecological cancers, I'm talking about not just research and treatment, but understanding the actual journey. And I'm fortunate to be partners. We're partners with a group in San Diego called Clarity Foundation. We are a fundraising and awareness organization. They're actually a clinical delivery organization. So if anyone you know is actually facing ovarian cancer, they have a counseling program, a treatment service, support service. We worked with them to actually genetically model Alice's tumor. That's one side of the equation, is let's try to make the journey better. The second piece of the equation is the other element we're talking about here, which is beginning to change the conversation around women, around gynecology, around health and sexuality. Okay?
That's great.
Those are our 2 goals.
Yeah. And Doug, we will certainly, at the end of this broadcast, after I get it posted, post all of the links to both the Cardinal Cancer Foundation and to Clarity, so that if there's someone, in the midst of this, who wants those counseling services and other resources, they have that there, and they were a tremendous help to you and Alice in your journey. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Doug, what did Alice teach you about the power of women using their voice?
That's a great question. And I can answer it. I can answer it because I saw the change in her. She loved being a wife. She loved being a mother. She embraced those lives completely. She also loved being a businesswoman. But at some point along the lines, she had to ask herself, who am I as Alice outside of those roles? And this journey began before we found out about the cancer, but the cancer sort of forced the acceleration of it. When you're faced with an insurmountable mountain, or a mountain that's as tall as it could possibly be, you've been on a walk, right? And all of a sudden you realize, now I've got a hike. I'd better figure this out.
Right.
What Alice discovered is that she has a voice, that it's a fierce, heroic, powerful voice, and that voice deserved to be heard. And the more she spoke and the more she communicated, the more she found that voice, and in so doing, the more she impacted other people. And so one of the things that she was very, very concerned about was that other women know that this journey is one you want to try to avoid by paying attention, by being proactive with your health, by seeing an OBGYN and not just a family practitioner or a general practitioner or an internist every year. I'll take flack for that, but I don't care. See an OBGYN, and if you don't have a good one, see a different one. You need a specialist to help you through this special journey. And she found her voice. And all that I'm trying to do now is keep that voice going. She was the one who created the voice. I had the honor of standing in front of her in awe of that voice. And all I'm trying to do is keep that voice alive, even though she's no longer here to voice it herself.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
What message do you have, Doug, for men who are interacting with the women in their lives, personally, professionally, as they are stepping into claiming their voice the way Alice claimed hers?
I'll summarize and answer that question with 2 recommendations for the women, for the men in the world who have women in their lives that they care about and whom they want to empower and support. Point number 1 is encourage the women in your lives to find that voice. And really study, and I have to do this every day, study my own behavior and habits to make sure I'm giving that voice an opportunity to fill space, to fill the air, to be heard. I wanted to hear Alice's voice. I needed to hear Alice's voice. But I was trained culturally to talk and not to listen in the presence of women. It's just a fact. It's the way that we were taught, trained, and understood. And so the first thing we have to do is make room. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, do not make the mistake of letting the women in your lives discount the small indicators that are bothering, annoying, frustrating, and worrying them that are indicators of health. If you care about the women in your lives, make sure to listen and then mirror that information back and ask them to take it seriously. Obviously, you can't make someone go to the doctor.
Sure.
We're all individuals, and you go to the doctor, maybe the doctor doesn't take it seriously. I mean, there are 1,000 obstacles to moving our lives forward and staying intact. The more, all I can say is encourage and listen, and then listen and encourage, both with the empowerment of those women and with their own protection of their own health and welfare. You do those 2 things, and you will create a platform for the women in your life to take on adventures and journeys and leadership roles you never could have imagined, and you'll be infinitely better for having done it.
I love the way you ended that, because I think you ended your answer by bringing it full circle to a partnership again, right? It's not just, you're not doing this out of just altruism, like I want women to succeed in some general format, right? It's about us being better together.
Yes.
And the beginning part of your answer kind of jogged my memory. Something that I hear fairly often is that we don't really need to do this much anymore because we've made so much progress. Look, there are women who are in CEO positions. Look, very few people get turned away for a job, although I was, and I'm not that old. This is very recent, but the Me Too movement is something that people just pile onto and make things up, and it's going overboard. And now we can't even joke with each other anymore. And,
this action reaction thing.
Yeah, the pendulum shifting too far in the other direction.
Yes.
Right.
Not right. Yes. So first of all, Alice, back before we were married, when we were engaged, worked for a law firm, and then we got married, and she got pregnant with our first child, and then she got fired for being pregnant from a law firm. So yes. So I get it. Okay. Interestingly enough, we didn't get it then. We just sort of went, oh, well, I mean,
Yeah.
you did what you had to do to keep moving on. And she ended up in a much more progressive company, and we were no worse for the wear, but it still happened. So here's the thing that drives me nuts about all this culture war nonsense. Okay. And I don't mean that it's nonsense in the sense that the issues are nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When Me Too came out, I talked about the fact that Alice is a Me Too victim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I am very personally invested. I have friends who were victims of police brutality. Even though I am very pro law enforcement, I care deeply about security and safety in our communities, but I was absolutely a supporter of Black Lives Matter. So I am not in any means minimizing those movements. What I'm talking about is our tendency to use the pendulum game to ignore the deeper issue, which is, okay, once we declare something and we establish some level of breakthrough, it's like an iceberg. Now the iceberg shows up above the water, but 98% of the iceberg is still underwater. Okay. So yes, we've made enormous strides in progress, but that would be the equivalent of saying, because we've had a black president, that racism in America has been solved.
Right.
Which is obviously ludicrous on the face. Okay. And so that's the same thing here, because we've become more progressive about women's health and women's sexuality and women's empowerment as a culture. That means we've achieved women's equality. No, it does not. And in fact, the hard part now is that the issues that need to be addressed next are much more subtle.
Yes.
Okay. So it's the same with so many issues. We've gotten through the big loud part.
Right.
And that's the 2%. And now we have to do the 98%, which is long, complex, more intricate. It's more about one-on-one relationships. It's myself, not everybody else. Okay. We may still need to do picketing. We may still need to storm the Bastille. There is still the need for large social action, but not if it isn't accompanied by individual action. It reminds me of the one of the fictionalized scenes, but not that far from the truth, in the 1990s film Forrest Gump, right? Where the whole sort of one of the jokes of the film is that the progressive left-wing activist also treats women horribly.
Right.
Okay? So great, he's out there yelling and screaming for progressivism, but he can't apply it in his own life. And that's why I call myself a recovering misogynist. Okay, I've resolved the 2%. Right? I am consciously aware of my desire to treat women with equality, to empower women. I'm progressive on the vast majority of women's issues as they're generally defined. I have conversations like that. Great, I've done the 2%. Am I making those micro decisions, 100 of them a day, to still empower and support the women in my life? Until I get that homework done, I'm a recovering misogynist.
Yeah. So I believe that's what they call a mic drop.
I'm going with it. Hold on. Or a headphone slam.
A headphone slam, I think, at this point. That's phenomenal, Doug. Thank you very much for your willingness to be so candid. For our viewers, before Doug and I went live on this broadcast, he told me that no question was off limits, and that takes a lot of bravery. And I just think that, besides it speaking so well of you, it will be tremendously impactful for all of the folks listening. Before I bring up a graphic that shows some contact information on the Cardinal Cancer Foundation, is there anything else, Doug, that you want to bring to people's attention or say?
I will end with this thought. Yes, it's absolutely critical for you as a woman and for all women who hear this message and watch this interview to find their voice and use it. It is also essential, in order for you to have that voice, that you listen to your body and listen to your health in ways that you have probably been taught to ignore and that everyone else around you has been taught to ignore. So if you want to keep that voice intact, please pay attention to your body and to your health and listen to all the signs and symptoms, and do not just pass off those things as, this is my life as a woman. Use that voice to advocate for yourself and for your health. And in so doing, you'll be having a huge impact on the future for millions of other women who you'll never even know you touched through that effort.
As Alice's voice will continue to do. Absolutely. Thank you, Doug. I'm going to take the title off my screen again to leave more room and bring up a placard, and Doug, you're going to stay with us for just a moment, but
Sure.
I want to put this to the full screen for a moment. And I do want to dedicate this episode to Alice with tremendous love, with gratitude for her bravery, for her joy, for her sheer will to live, and with determination that what she went through doesn't have to be gone through by so many women. This can be avoided in many, many cases, and it deserves to be avoided in every case that we can possibly manage it.
That's
so
right.
To donate to the Cardinal Cancer Foundation, you can visit their website. It is www.cardinalcancer.org. I will post this information in the comments after this broadcast is put up back up on Facebook, along with the information for clarity. And this is not this mini-series has not been a platform to promote any organization or sell anything, but this is a cause that is personal and important and vital to the health of our nation, to the health of the people that we love, to the health of women. So I'm putting it everywhere I possibly can.
Thank you. And I will add, Marissa, that on the Cardinal Cancer website is a downloadable PDF that summarizes things to look for, signs and symptoms, and also 3 steps you can take as a woman to reduce your risk or know how to respond when ovarian cancer might arrive. So
Great.
Please visit the website not only to donate, of course, we'd love any financial support, but really go to the website to download that PDF and learn those steps to protect your own health.
Fantastic. And Doug, if there's a specific link to the page that has those documents, we can always put that up as well.
It's right up front. So when you
right
go to cardinalcancer.org, you'll see it right away.
Fantastic. Great. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today for this really special edition of The Power of Women Using Their Voices. And Doug, I want to thank you for your candor, your spirit, your love, and your dedication in carrying on Alice's voice and in being so brave in doing so.
It was an honor to be here. Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you so much, Doug. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.